Well, people will be joining throughout the session. We'll let that continue to happen, but we can get started here. So welcome everybody to our next webinar in our series. It's a 3-act formula advice for effective research presentations by Dr. Sandra Jarvis-Selinger. And this is, yeah, I think it's the third or fourth session this morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you might be in the world, for the Hip Hope Network, which is a global network of hip health practitioners around the world. And we're excited to bring this series of educational and discussional webinars. I'll be introducing Dr. Jarvis-Selinger in just a moment, but first I'll kick us off with our traditional recognition that the Hip Hope Network operates in part in the current unceded traditional and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish Nation and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I'm here in Vancouver, Canada, and we invite all of you to reflect on the current traditional and ancestral territories, lands, and waters, which allow us to work, live, and play, and allow you to work, live, and play wherever you may be. So we'll move on to just a quick disclaimer that all of these webinars that we perform here are for reflecting the opinions, interpretations, and insights of the authors and presenters, not necessarily those of the Hip Hope Network. And so they're intended for informational and educational purposes only. You can see that we have some language there, just in case to manage if there's any errors, or, it's all about opinions and interpretations and insights that we hope to discuss for today. We'll carry on. But about the Hip Hope Network. So if any of you have not been exposed to the Hip Hope Network today, welcome. What we do is we aim to bring together hip health experts to advance research and other topics in pediatric orthopedics, share knowledge, galvanize professional collaborations globally. Our mission is to improve hip health, mobility, and the quality of care for children with hip conditions worldwide, and we envision a future with a solution for every hip health challenge. Please do get connected. We're active on different social media and also on hiphopnetwork.org. You'll find a platform of growing materials and all of our work here is generously supported by the Peterson Group here in Vancouver and the I'm a Hippie Foundation as well. I'll mention that if you go to our website and you go on to our next slide, one of the things you'll find is a growing history of our webinar recordings. And we are recording today. Are we on recording? Great. So this will be available too for folks who want to either catch up on a part that they missed today, or especially for folks who aren't able to join. And so now I will introduce today's speaker. Dr. Jarvis-Selinger is Associate Dean Academic in the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Sciences right here at the University of British Columbia. She's a PhD trained developmental psychologist and researcher in the area of human learning development and instruction. She has plenty of experience developing medical education programs and supporting specialized applied learning and knowledge translation. And some folks here may recognize Sandra. She's previously presented practical insights to orthopedic health professionals, including at the International Pediatric Orthopedics Symposium. We're very excited to have her direct help as we develop at the Hip Hope Network's educational program, and to have her here today to provide advice for effective research presentations, which I know will become a well-used resource going forward as people access the recording in future. So welcome, Sandra. Welcome, Dr. Jarvis-Selinger. I'll pass it over to you and we can get your slide deck going.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So thumbs up that you can see my first slide. Awesome. All right. Thanks everybody for joining this morning, this afternoon, or this evening. As Joel said, it's around advice for effective research presentations. And I'm going to do it in 3 acts. So before I jump into the first act, I just want you to take a moment to reflect, because it's really important the way that you approach your topics and your disciplinary expertise when you want to share that knowledge out in presentation form. So the first thing is you have to know yourself. And what I mean by that is, what is your superpower or what is your kryptonite? So if you reflect on yourself as a presenter, one of the things you need to know is things like, are you funny? Can you use humor in your presentation? Are you a really great storyteller to be able to show something that might be particularly complex, but you can start to simplify it for your audience? What are the things that you really lean on that you know you do well? And then what are those things that might be a little bit harder for you to navigate through? So for instance, if you're a really great storyteller and you have a way of using analogy and other things to make your point, you also have to understand that you have to build that into the way that you approach your presentation. Because if you're a commentator, you can also go over time or wander down pathways where the audience is really not going to join you. So I always like to say that this is a real, as much as we can over Zoom, be active learning. Anybody want to share something that they think is either their superpower or their kryptonite when they think about being a presenter?
I can.
Joel.
I lose track of time. I think that's something I think things will fit within a certain time and then they often don't. And I find myself then rushing toward the end.
That's a really good one. And you really have to think about how you manage that then when you know going in that time might play against you. Anybody else?
I think one of my superpowers is visuals.
Okay. So then how do you lean into that like this, right? This is one of those things that you may forget a lot of things that a presenter is saying, but visuals can be really impactful and you can hook that in to what you're thinking about. So as we go through the 3 acts, think about that in terms of personally applying it to yourself, because it's not just about being a bad impression of a good presenter. It's really about leaning into the things that you do well and understanding how to navigate the things that might be a little harder for you to do. So here we go. The advice in 3 acts. Not surprisingly, my first act is the beginning. So when you think about a presentation, I want to give 2 pieces of advice at the beginning and really be able to navigate through that. And again, apply that personally to to how you approach. And also, the other thing that you have to think about is how complex the topic is compared to the audience, and really being able to bridge what you want them to leave with, what you want them to learn, and how you're going to package that information in the presentation. So my first piece of advice is don't be a mystery novelist. So when you think about your presentation, you really want to start with the end in mind first. A lot of times, you can lose the audience very quickly if they don't understand really the point of the presentation. So, so for instance, in this presentation today, I packaged it in 3 acts. So you're already preparing, right? You've seen the first act is the beginning. You're starting to move ahead and think, gee, I wonder what act 2 is. I wonder what act 3 is. And when I talk about setting the stage, if I go too long without revealing the point of the story, then the issue becomes the audience starts to lose the thread and starts to lose the way that you're navigating through this. So it's okay to have a little bit of a reveal. You know, there's always those moments where people have the ahas, but really what you want to do is set out very clearly, whether you do that in the title, whether you do that in the first bit. So for me, it's really around understanding how you think about yourself as a presenter and really move through these 3 different phases of a presentation. So it's always a draw to think about, I just want the big reveal at the end. But the problem is if you lose the audience too soon, then there isn't really a big reveal at the end, because they will get distracted. You will start to see that body language break down. You will feel that disconnect. The other thing that I will say is, please, if there's any questions or comments that you'd like to make, if it's not easy to do by turning off your mute button, you can certainly put some questions or comments in the chat. And I know Joel and Tamara will watch that for me. So the second thing that we think about when we think about the beginning of an effective presentation is being able to find your hook. What is the thing that's going to hook your audience into wanting to know what you know? So like Tamara talked about, she and I share the impact of graphics, right? So those are the hooks. The superpower kryptonite idea of knowing yourself and being able to translate that into an effective presentation and effectively organize your material is my hook. So if I can hook that into what do you do well, what do you do not so well, then as I'm unpacking the rest of this presentation, what I want you to do, I want you to hook into is, okay, so how would I think about a topic that I'm presenting where I'm not going to be a mystery novelist? And how am I going to hook the audience in the first couple of minutes so that they really understand and they're with me? And so that idea of finding the thing that's going to keep them in. So when we think about some of, say, the clinical topics or research topics that you're presenting, sometimes it's, I know I've seen in the clinical topic, sometimes it's an image or an x-ray, right, that hooks people in. Sometimes it's a story of a patient that hooks people in. Sometimes it's the, what did you find in the research work that you're doing that's really interesting that hooks people in. So when you think about the beginning of the presentation, you really have to think about that catch them, right? That's the analogy and why I've used this picture. How are you going to catch them? And I will say, in today's world, with when you're in large rooms and doing big research presentations, there's lots of distractions within a foot or two of the person that's sitting in the audience. So they may have their computer open, they may have their phone on their lap, right? They may think about all of the other kinds of things. And what you want to do is have them forget that they can multitask in your presentation. Any questions or comments about that? So you've started with the beginning. No surprise, Act 2 is the middle. And we're going to spend a little bit more time in here because this is really where the meat of the presentation starts to come in. And so when you think about it, you really have to imagine that the setup is the thing that's going to hook people into it. This is the time, the middle is the time when you're going to present all that great information. And you're going to really translate what you know, and you really want them to learn something about it. So the next slide, I think, based on Joel's comment, is for you, Joel. Time can be your enemy. So one of the things, we know this, right? And we think about it. So you have a certain amount of time to present. You have a lot of information. You're an expert in the area. You're very passionate about it. You want to put everything that you can in the presentation. And when expertise meets time, time becomes the enemy of expertise. And so what happens is, I think, Joel, you mentioned it in your comment, the only thing you can speed up when you run out of time is the end, right? And that's the place, that's the area of the presentation that you don't want to speed up. So if you take too long at the beginning and you pack too much in, or you weave too many stories, or you have too much commentary, based on what you've planned going into the presentation, then we've seen this happen before. The classic, let me just cross over those 17 slides to get to the place at the end because I've only got, they're giving me the 2-minute warning at the end and I've only got a few things to say. And so then I speed up, and the quickest way to lose somebody is the feeling like you didn't plan and you had to think about the ebb and flow of what the beginning into the middle, and how that setup and hook helps you go in and decide what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And so what you need to think about is the idea of reverse engineering, right? So you want to be able to tell them at the beginning what's going to happen. You want to use the middle to flesh that out. And then you want to retell and reinforce at the end. And you have to think about that in the block of time that you're given. So you're given a 10-minute presentation, you have to think about that in terms of less information, more engagement, more thought. You got a longer presentation, you can kind of ebb and flow. You can speed up a little bit in the middle, you can slow down, you can stretch it a bit. But you really have to think about the fact that if you haven't accounted for a good amount of time, you're going to lose them at the end because all you're going to do is speed up over that. This gets into the other thing, which I always say, less is more. And some of this is around the planning that you put into it. So I love to put a lot of information in a short period of time. I know that about myself. That's my kryptonite. I also know that I like to tell stories and weave in and put in a little bit more commentary than maybe I planned for when I put the presentation together. So my advice was, I need to slow down and simplify. I need to move away from having really text-heavy slides. And now this presentation lends itself really well to simple, powerful statements and graphics. I realize that other presentations, you're going to need the classic title slide, some bullet points, a lot more information on it. And I get it. It's not about being able to simplify your slides way down, but it is about watching for that text heaviness. You want to be crisp, clear, concise. And so when you put your PowerPoint together, when you're finished that first draft, cut 25% of it out, right? Use your hook to decide how much really do you need in the middle. Use your conclusion to decide how much time do you need at the end. And a lot of times what happens is that first draft is everything that you want to have in there. And the problem is you probably will not need it all. And it has to all help support your message. So I always say the less is more. Less slides, less words than you think. And the idea is, when you're thinking about a presentation, and the time in which you have to put it together. I would submit that every one of you could talk more if you got through your slides quicker, right? You can fill in a lot of blanks if you have less information that you're going through. It's much harder if you have more information to get through it in that time. So you can always stop, tell a story, ask for questions, get some interaction going. You can fill in that time. But on the other side is if you have too much information, it's hard to take it away in real time. Right. The other thing that this relates to for me is PowerPoints shouldn't be scripts. And what I mean by that is everybody in the audience should be able to read the information that you put up there. And so what's usually really distracting, and it can be at two levels, is the presenter just simply reading the bullet points to the audience. And so what happens is a lot of times people in the audience are like, and because I can read everything that you have up on the slide, so are we just basically doing a read aloud session? What else do you have to tell me? How are you going to make that information live? What's the other things that are going to connect to what you have up on the slides? The other piece that is sometimes a real pitfall is, depending on the room setup, either the presenter will look down at the confidence monitor and then they'll just read everything, and the audience is just simply seeing the top of their head and they're just looking at this. So then what they'll say is exactly what's next on the slide. Easiest way to disconnect from the audience, because if you're not making that connection, then they don't feel like they have to make the connection to you. The other thing that happens is PowerPoint's behind you. The projection is behind you. The images are behind you. There is no confidence monitor. You already know this, right? You know the end of this story. So what happens? You turn around and you start looking here, and then you're reading off the slide and you're doing those kinds of things. Two things usually happen there. You move away from the microphone because you're turning your back to the audience. And secondly, you're turning your back to the audience and you're simply sort of pointing out on the PowerPoint. So what you want to be able to do is separate out. If you have those bullet points, highlight. This is an important thing to understand, right? Micro pause. Take a moment to make that point, right? The other thing is, if it's a topic that you're not well versed on and you haven't presented a lot of times, usually what happens is you build the PowerPoint as your script. And so one of the things that I used to do in some of the more text-heavy presentations that I had to do is I would build the PowerPoint as the script, exactly how I wanted to say what I wanted to do. Then I would take those things and drop them in the notes section, because it's still things that I want to be able to say about my topic. But the audio should be more than the image. And so what you do then is say, what are the major things that I want to put on the slide that is going to reinforce my message? Because what I'm saying and what they're seeing need to go together, but they don't need to be the exact same thing. When you first start out, you hold very dearly to those PowerPoints as scripts. As you're able to get more comfortable with the topic, you're able to pull back more, have that more in your notes, have that more in the commentary, in the dry run that you do, and not just simply read what's up there. This is a big one for me. So many times I've heard people say, I'm so sorry, the slide is busy. I'm so sorry, I know you can't see the table that's up there on the slide. The moment you have to apologize, don't use it, right? Because if it's distracting, if it's unreadable, if it's too packed, then you have to do something different. Sorry, you can't read the article that's up there, but trust me, it's important. Well, if it's important, then you have to be able to import it into your slide deck in a different way. The other thing that you need to think about is the readability of slides when you're doing your presentation. A lot of times, obviously, we build our slides when we're standing a couple of feet away from our monitor. We have high resolution, large monitors in front of us. We put the whole thing together and we're like, boy, that's really going to work well. And then when you project it on a screen and you're 30, 50, 100 feet away from it, it washes out, it's unreadable. So one of the things that you can do when you put your slide deck together is put it up in presenter mode in presentation mode on your screen, walk across the room, and it's better if you have a bigger room, and see how much you can read. How big is the font? How clear are the tables or the images? How much does it do? Because as you move away from that high def monitor, you're going to start to see that that 14-point font is not going to read well when you walk away from it. That table is going to wash out. There's not enough contrast, or there's too much on the slide. And the moment you feel like you're going to apologize to the audience, then you have to reconsider whether you're going to use it or not. Right. White space makes the audience happy, and so does balance. It's really distracting if you see a title slide and one bullet at the top and nothing else, right? What happens is if you look at the way that reads when it's projected out to the audience, you're not using the real estate on the slide. So the other thing that you want to do is not just be able to read what you have there, but understand how it's balanced on the slide. Are the images starting to overlap with each other? Is there really imbalance where you don't see that clear differentiation between the important points and the slightly less important points? So you have to think how you want to balance that information. And a lot of times it's just break it up onto 2 slides, work it between 2 different things. Don't over animate, but use animation to help some of the reveal, some of the balance. The other thing, when you're using images, use the animation to point out what you want the audience to be able to see, because a lot of times they may not be seeing the same things that you're doing. So think about the balance of the information and how you're using the real estate on every slide to really have that aesthetic, because a lot of times the distractions come, and once they kind of invade the audience, you can really understand that if it's unreadable and it's unbalanced and you're using a whole mix of different fonts and you're over animating and all of those things, that becomes distracting from the message that you're really trying to get across to the group. So the final thing that I will say in the middle, and this is always one that I challenge people to do, especially in large audiences, is how to get them active. Now, the first thing that people think when we think about active is that back and forth between, the questions or getting feedback or getting comments. And that can be really hard to do in a large room, because a lot of times there's audience members who are like, yeah, I might have something to say, but I don't want to say it here. But when I say get them active, it isn't just that part. So get them, there's a really great way called think and pair and share. And so what you could do is throw out a question to an audience and say, turn to the person next to you, answer the question, have them answer it back to you. Or come up with a question. What's a controversy on this topic? Challenge them. What's a thing that you haven't thought about before? It doesn't mean that they have to then share it back with you, but you can hear the chatter in the room. You're going to move the presentation, the locus of control of the presentation, from you to them. Simply turning and talking to a neighbor, sharing an idea, coming up with a question, answering a question is a way to keep them active. Challenging their assumptions is a way to keep them active. debating something where you think, okay, if you disagree with me, talk to the person next to you and tell them why you disagree with this position. Introduce a controversy, right? That's another way to really get them to think, oh, I never thought of it that way. This is something, that idea of the devil's advocate, like think about the opposite of what you'd want to do. So you really want to try to get that level of engagement, even if it isn't in the way that we think about it, between the student and the presenter, between the audience member and the presenter. So that's the idea of cognitive activation is really as good as that physical activation of them doing something, putting up their hand, walking to a microphone, asking a question. So I'm going to take another pause and see if there's any comments or questions before I start to move through to Act 3 and the end. Joel.
Yeah, I'll ask one. So sometimes like today, we're in online environments. Sometimes we're in hybrid, live audience plus online audience. Do you have favorite ways of prompting some kind of engagement, considering like environmental context like that?
Yeah, I think the big thing around active is understanding the limitations of the modality and the opportunity for individuals to be active. So I can imagine that individuals around this call may be driving, doing other things, trying to listen, wanting to have that somewhat connected, somewhat disconnected. We also have right now a modality where few have their cameras on, so it's hard to see whether they are, facing the screen, connected to our conversation, or whether they're in the best of intentions, trying to listen in the context that they're currently operating in. So in these kinds of things, it's the how active can I get you? So what happens for me is what I want you to do is reflect. That's about as much activity as I think I can manage in this session. If we can raise the bar and somebody asks questions or makes comments or puts something in the chat, awesome, right? That starts to move things up. That's very different than like when you say in a hybrid format. What you want to do in that situation is understand that you're moving between modalities. And so a lot of times what I try, because it's really easy to get drawn into those that are in the audience, right? Because they're there and you can see them and you can make eye contact and you kind of give the look like, hey, Joel, did you want to make a comment or, ask a question? That's really easy to do. So then what you really have to do is for that group that's online is to try your best to be able to pull them in to say, I understand that there may be other things going on as you join here today, but I really want you to think about what you can take home with this, what questions you're going to ask yourself right now, right? And what you're doing then is trying to move that locus of control over to them without expecting something different than they can give you. That makes sense. In the fully online situation, that really is modulated by what I would call the vibe of the virtual room. So the vibe of the virtual room right now is a lot of cameras off, right? And so my opportunity is really to get you thinking. The vibe of the room could be people come in and lots of cameras go on. That's going to be a very different connection. So when you start the presentation, you kind of have to lean into what is the vibe, especially in the Zoom room, what is the vibe of the room in the Zoom room? Yeah, Joel?
I am just going to pass on a couple of questions that I've noticed posted in the Q&A here. A couple from Akash Ghosh. Do you think polls are a good way to engage the crowd? And then a follow-up, usually the run-through, and they're separate, but I'll throw them both to you now. Usually the run through in practice takes less time than the actual on-stage presentation. Is there any way to tackle this? So a couple of different questions
Yeah.
there.
So yes, I think polls are a really good way to get individuals active. My advice is when you every time you introduce a poll into a presentation, you have to borrow from your content because it absolutely is a great form of engagement. It takes time. You're relying on shifting technologies. And so, like Slido, for instance, embeds really well in PowerPoint. And so it sort of like helps with the not shifting between major technologies. But any of that will take time. And so what you can't do is say you have an hour presentation that you've done all the time, and then you decide you want to put a poll in, an audience technology enabled poll in, but you change nothing else in your presentation, time will be your enemy. So you have to decide, what are you trading off in order to do that and have those opportunities to share in that engaged way. And the other thing is that you also have to provide wait time, because when you launch a poll question, you need people to think about it. You want them to really reflect on it and answer. Really good, complex, thoughtful questions take time for the audience. And so a lot of times we don't wait enough for that to happen. And then you don't get really that wonderful engagement that you want, because it feels awkward. And I will say, it does not feel as awkward to the audience as it does to the presenter, because you know the question ahead of time. You know what you were going to ask them, but you have to give them time to think about their answer and to engage in that poll. So the other question was around the run through being much smoother and much faster than the actual presentation. So one of the tips that I have is think about your cut points in your presentation. And so the way that I do that is to say, where do I want to be by a certain time? What's my cut point? What I usually have, and if I have control like I do here in this modality, is I have hidden slides rather than crossover slides. So the way that I use hidden slides are, if I have more time, I can lean into those hidden slides. But I always plan to not get through everything that I think I can get through, even if I did get through it in the dry run. That way, I have a lighter version that is probably more realistic to get through in the time. And if I have more time, we can pause and talk more, we can engage more, I can fill the time with other things. So that's what I mean by cutting it down from what you think. When you get through your dry run, think, what are the cut points? I want to be to slide 15 by this time. I want to be to slide 20 by this time. And which ones can I jump over? Well, if those are the ones I jump over, I hide those. If I have time, I lean into those. But if that's always the piece, don't lean into your timing based on the dry run. Always know, like the comment was made, you can get through more. All right. So the end. Going back to think about not being a mystery novelist, set up your hook, use the middle to really make your information flow, keep that engagement going as you can, get the audience to reflect on things. So the first thing that I will say is, at the end of your presentation, you have to think about sticking the landing, right? Think about what you're going to end with, because the end is going to be the thing that the audience will leave with. What have you thought about that really, if you start with that strong hook and you use the middle to reinforce that message, sticking the landing at the end is really being very aware and conscious about what this means to the audience. How are you going to conclude? What is the message you want to leave with? If you're in a big conference with a lot of presentations and symposia and other things that are going on in workshops, simple and to the point is the most memorable. Because if you think about it, if you leave them with a lot of things to think about, here are the 15 points that you have to think about when you think about this topic. They're not going to leave with that because everybody's going to load them with those kinds of summary points. But if you say, if you remember nothing else, remember micropause for emphasis, and then give them what you think they need to leave with, what they need to think about, how they need to go. And that simplicity of sticking that landing and thinking about the end is going to be really important and really memorable. Related to that, and this is something that this is a phrase that I coined a couple of years ago in one of the orthopedic presentations, and now I'm using it all the time. I say, avoid the conclusion cliff. So what do I mean by that? If you're using PowerPoint to present your material and you see this slide, right? So as you're clicking through your presentation, after you get past the last slide, this is what shows up. End of slideshow, click to exit, right? That's the image that comes up. If you see that and you're surprised, you fell off the conclusion cliff, right? So what happened was you had a really good hook. You had a really good start. You moved through the middle. People were with you. You had a level of engagement. You had them thinking, all of those kinds of things. And then you just fell off the end. Thank you very much. End of show. Click to exit. And then it's just, it's sort of that moment in the audience where people were like, that felt like we were waiting for this really good ending and it didn't come. So we all do it, and I have done it too. You have that question mark slide, or thank you, exclamation point slide. That's not the conclusion you want to leave them with. What is the thing that's going to be memorable? What is the thing that you're going to leave them with? And that relates to the last thing around when you think about reverse engineering, you really want to pay attention to the ending. What do you want to leave them with? And this for me is really the major part of how I think people should think about effective presentations is it's not about what you end with, it's what they end with. And so the big thing is, what will they take away from your presentation? What will they pack up and remember? You want to reinforce that. Give them a moment to think about what they could take back. What happens when they leave here? Help them understand what might be difficult or challenging about that. Right? You don't have to spend a lot of precious time at the end of your presentation. You can simply say, these are the things that I would imagine you could take away from this. Do something active. I've said this before, make a note, send an email to yourself, jot something down, turn to your neighbor and say, this is something that I really learned, and this is my aha moment here. And that, again, when I talk about locus of control, it moves the I know it to I want them to know it. So what is it that you want them to know? And what is it that you want them to do with that knowledge? Have that kind of hook. Think about the way that you do that. Imagine your whole presentation in these 3 acts. What do you do at the beginning? How does the middle support that? And what are you going to leave so that it's not just you that learned something, it's them that learned something and they can take away with it. So with that, then I will say, what's your take home? Think about that. What is the thing when we go back and think about yourself? your superpowers, your kryptonites, and what I've talked about in the 3 acts. Is anybody willing to share one of their take homes?
I'm happy to go first here. I I have to admit I've seen you present on this before, or recording of, and it's always interesting, and I'm sure I'll be referring to this again for some good reminders in the future. And for me, lots of good things to remember there. But I really like what you mentioned about managing pace throughout, and that idea of having, because I've kind of had back pocket slides that I stick at the end that might be, oh, if something comes up, but I like your idea of those sort of hidden options that maybe you use it, maybe you don't. They become sort of a flex. So I thought that was a pretty cool thing that I'm going to take away from this one today.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we always fall into is we just want it all, right? We want everything in there. And we're excited about it, and it's topics we're passionate about. And so that's the piece about that sort of modulating between I wanted to, I want them to be as passionate about it. I want to tell them everything that I know, right? And I want to be able to do that effectively. And the trade-off is in what time are you able to do that? And what messages are you able to get across? And the simple, powerful take homes are the place that you want to go, because at the end of it, what's the point of the presentation? The point of the presentation is you want your audience to learn something, and you want them to do something with what they've learned. And so a lot of times too much information really interferes with that, with that hope. All right. So I challenge you to think, what will you take home? What can you do with this now? How will you reflect on this? Look at your presentations differently and think about 1 or 2 things that you may want to do based on what you heard this morning, this afternoon, or this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Jarvis-Selinger. That was inspiring again. I really appreciate hearing all those excellent, transferable, like those are useful in so many ways and very applicable to the focus of today, which was especially focusing on scientific material and for professional audiences. Really great stuff. I think if there's any other questions that come up, we'll pass them on to you. It seems like we've covered the Q&A, so we'll just wrap up here. So yes, really appreciative. And just a reminder for folks who haven't already, yeah, just visit the website and you can be notified of future events and not just webinars, but other updates to the materials we have on our site or other opportunities to get engaged. We have different kinds of meetings and activities from time to time. So yeah, it's free. Just fill out a form and we'll make sure that you stay informed of this and other things. And then lastly, just again, thank you so much for Sandra, Dr. Jarvis-Selinger, for your presentation, and everybody for joining today. And yeah, looking forward to, I know myself, referring back to this from time to time as I prepare for important presentations. And this will be something that we recommend to future presenters in our sessions, let alone for, people who can use this wherever it makes sense as they're presenting in their professional lives going forward. So thanks again. Stay connected. We have different ways to do this. And I don't know if you had anything else, Sandra, for a closing remark.
No, I'm happy, like you said, if people have other questions or comments, I'm also happy to take specific things, because obviously these are general pieces of advice, but sometimes people have specific questions about the type of presentation that they're doing or the topic that they're doing it on. And again, I'm really happy to share some feedback and observations.
Really great. Well, thanks again, and looking forward to our next webinars. So yeah, do stay connected. We'll be announcing those soon. Thanks again. Bye, everybody.